Hello, this is another edition of 3 Key with Oliver, an opportunity that I get as the Dean of this fine School of Veterinary Medicine at LSU to interview a member of our community. Whether it's a student, member of staff, or member of faculty, it is an honor and a joy for me to discover a little bit more about what they're doing to advance our values of innovation, integrity, and compassion. So here with me today, and I'm really excited about this one, is Dr. Ethan Anderson. He is an assistant professor in the tenure track within the Department of Comparative Biomedical Sciences, and his specific interest is addiction and the impact that those cravings for substance have on the brain and the way it's wired, and indeed finding new treatments for those devastating challenges that some members of our community face. I think this is going to be a very interesting interview. So on that note, let's begin. So Dr. Anderson, welcome. I'm really thrilled to have you with me. And addiction is obviously a crucial factor in some people's lives. It destroys lives. Unfortunately, 1 in 10 people have cravings that they can't control. Can you give us a bit of an insight, maybe in lay terms, on what happens in the brain when someone is faced with addiction and simply can't stop themselves reaching for that emotional crutch?
Sure, absolutely. There are many changes that are going to occur in the brain when people take substances. A lot of these substances over time, they sort of rewire the brain through some type of neuroplasticity mechanisms, and they can really lead to fundamental changes in the way that the nervous system reacts to stimuli. So for instance, somebody who's used to taking something like heroin or drinking alcohol for long periods of time, when they are faced with those things, they see them, they just can't seem to help but have these highly intensive cravings that they can't seem to control for it. Now, we understand a lot of what's going on with those. We understand some of the important brain areas that are important for things like craving, but we don't really know the fundamental molecular mechanisms that are occurring and changing and responsible for those. And more importantly, I think we don't really know how to treat those things yet. Those are some aspects that we really can't control yet, in some ways, but very much like those people themselves.
Right. And obviously addictions have been here as long as people have occupied the earth. It seems paradoxical to me that not more is known about this, but as you say, it's an emerging field. Other than cognitive therapy to try and wean people off their substance of abuse, what are you doing in terms of therapies? How can your approach help the complementary cognitive therapeutic approaches?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, just to do a little background for what you said, people have been using for thousands and thousands of years. I believe the oldest record we have is an archaeological one of an opium pipe, a pipe with opium in it from thousands, I think 6,000 years ago or so. So it's been around for a long time. The diagnosis of addiction itself is a rather newer concept, though. I think what people have been doing is studying the biggest problems first, right? So, for instance, we're pretty good at doing things like keeping somebody from overdosing, right? So we can fix that with something called naloxone, or sold on the over-the-counter as Narcan now. So we can do things like bring somebody back from an overdose.
Right.
And we can also sort of help to wean people off substances. And so we can do those things, and that's what a lot of the science over the last 100 years has done.
Right.
But what we're still left with today is things like this craving that I keep talking about. We still don't quite understand how that works and how exactly to reduce those high levels of craving in people. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to take it that next step farther, and we're trying to understand what exactly is changing in the brain in some of those really important reward-related regions that I was speaking about. And if we can find what those changes are, then maybe we can find future medications to treat that.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm aware that you have an interest in is relapse. You know, a large proportion of patients, once they become clean, it's a rather facile term, but once they wean themselves off the substance of abuse, then sadly in the future find themselves back to using it. What is the underlying mechanism, and how can we address that? Because that's where the real tragedies occur, where people simply go back to behaviors of abuse that they ostensibly had weaned themselves off or rectified.
Yep, absolutely. I'd say we're just not there yet, and we don't really understand everything that's going on with that. What's definitely true is that people can witness the very sort of triggering things in their environment, things that remind themselves.
There must be triggers, yeah.
Absolutely. If you take something like alcohol use disorder, which is the new term we use for alcoholism, it's all around. We're in a society where there's alcohol that's available at every hour of the day pretty much. So there are always these cues. It's really, really difficult to try to get a handle on that. Basically, I mean, in a sense, what's going on is that drugs of abuse are acting like endogenous rewards. So you have a reward system that is supposed to be able to respond to cues for things that we want. You want to respond to cues for water, good food, companionship, things like that. And drugs of abuse kind of take over this system. They sort of hijack it, is a lot of the terminology that we use these days. And they just make it so that when people see something like alcohol or heroin, a person that used to deal in heroin or something like that, they get these same kind of triggering cravings. So it's almost like super intense hunger or super intense thirst. And those things, of course, you don't want to control them, right? So evolutionarily, you want to go to things that are going to satiate you for hunger and thirst. These drugs of abuse are acting on many of those same systems. So it's just such a hardwired system that's a really, really difficult thing to...
Right. So something is co-opting normal biological mechanisms and leading to adverse outcomes. You were brought up in a small town, I believe. Could you tell us a little bit about how that upbringing and childhood and teenage years, the experiences that you had, influenced your perception on addiction and what prompted you to get into this fascinating area in the first place? It really is very important, and I'm wondering if you could give us some insight as to why you chose that path.
Sure. I think that very similar to, I think, almost everyone in the country and kind of the world around, everyone knows people that suffer from addiction. So absolutely. I have members of my family, and I have known many, many people growing up that have unfortunately had very, very difficult times with addiction, and it can lead to very bad social situations, homelessness, and things like that. And being able to see those things firsthand really made me at first just really, really concerned, and then also incredibly curious about how those things work. So doing that, having seen those things, I wanted to go work possibly with addicted patients in the future. I originally planned to be a medical doctor and maybe do psychiatry. But then as I learned more about the problem, I realized there was this big gap. And we really can't treat those things like cravings. So that led me to this path instead, where I'd like to think that hopefully give me 10 years or so, and maybe we'll get to something that we can get to the market that we can hopefully treat people with to allow them to help control these cravings and get back to a more normal life.
Absolutely. And just give us a few tidbits on what your next steps are in terms of your research. Without getting too technical, sure. I'm sure you can tell us a little bit about what the next year or two will bring.
One of the big things we're looking at right now is trying to find some novel medications. So we have a few novel protein targets in the brain that seem to be implicated with addiction, at least in certain regions of the brain. And we are trying to develop some novel compounds that can possibly inhibit these. And preclinically, for instance, in some of the animal studies, we show that this allows animals to not have to drink as much alcohol or not have as much craving for things like heroin, and using animal models. And what we hope to do is take some of this preclinical data and further test it, of course, make sure it's all very safe. But potentially we could, in theory, be doing clinical trials in maybe 3 to 5 years. And then if everything goes perfectly well, could maybe have a new drug on the market in 10 to 15, I would say.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that's certainly an aspiration worth pursuing. Any final comments before we end?
Well, I'd just like to say how much I appreciate being here at LSU. There are some fantastic researchers. I've made a lot of collaborations with different researchers around here. For instance, there's Dr. Joyce just down the hall. Also, Dr. Fabio Vigil right through that door right there. We have been collaborating. It's a really, really great environment. Hopefully, we are going to be able to work on some more new novel drugs as well that could hopefully one day make it to the clinic to help cure people of addiction.
There you have it. We have just concluded another edition of 3Q with Oliver, featuring one of our wonderful biomedical scientists. We are all about One Health here at LSU Vet Med, and that includes animals and, importantly, people and human healthcare advances. We have great expertise in neuroscience, and there is no other exemplar of that than Dr. Anderson. So thank you for listening, and until next time.